She didn't leave with fireworks. She faded. It started with a shift in how she looked at you. Like her eyes were reaching for something you weren't offering. She still showed up, still smiled, still asked how your day was. But behind every word was a silence. Behind every laugh, a question. And you knew it. You felt her slipping, not loudly, but like water leaking through your fingers. Slowly, relentlessly. Still. You didn't flinch. You didn't explain. You didn't panic. You didn't beg. Not because you were playing games, but because something in you knew. If she couldn't feel your presence in your stillness, then she was never really with you, just with the version of you that moved when she did. So you stopped moving, and that's when something broke. Not in you, in her. She gave in, not to another man, but to her fear, to the narrative she built that said, if he really wanted me, he'd prove it. But you weren't built to prove, you were built to remain. And in the quiet of your unshaken posture, she heard something louder than any love. Confession, she heard truth. Because men like you don't perform. You hold, you observe, you feel. In silence, and while she walked away thinking you gave nothing, she'll spend the rest of her life remembering the man who never chased, never begged, never broke, yet somehow left her shattered. You didn't notice it at first, not because you weren't paying attention, but because the change was so gentle, so delicate, it almost felt imagined. She still laughed at your jokes, but her laughter didn't linger. She still touched your arm, but only for a second. Her goodnight texts still came, but they didn't feel like hers. Anymore, something had changed. And though her body was near, her energy had already stepped back. This is how a woman leaves, not all at once, but piece by piece. It begins in the eyes. The sparkle dims, the gaze shifts. It no longer rests on you like you're her safe place. It scans the room for something she can't name. You felt it. You just didn't react. Not because you were numb, but because you were grounded. You didn't fall into panic. You didn't become a detective trying to figure her out. You didn't rush into over-explaining, over-apologizing, or over-correcting. You stayed still, not cold. Not cruel still, because deep down, you've learned this. When a woman begins to pull away, it's not always a sign to chase. Sometimes, it's a mirror. A test. A reflection of her own storm, not your failure. You let her shift. You didn't beg for the light to come back. You watched, and that silence, your calm, unmoved presence, felt like rejection to her. But it wasn't. It was awareness. You saw the shift. You just refused to collapse in front of it because you're not a man who tries to fix. A woman's storm, you're the man who stays standing until the storm passes. And that's when she starts to feel the difference. It's not all at once, but in quiet moments when she glances at you, sees a man who never chased because he never had to. She wanted to feel something. Not just your presence, but your pull. The kind of pull that says, I see you. I feel you. I choose you even when you're hard to love. So she pulled back, subtly with quiet hesitation, dressed as independence. And what she was really doing was watching. Watching. How you'd respond to her retreat. Would you panic? Would you lean in harder? Would you drop your calm just to win her closeness again? This was the test. Not one she planned consciously, but one that bloomed from a place. Side her that still doubts. The part that whispers, if he really wanted me, he'd fight harder. And you didn't fight, not in the way she expected. You didn't send long texts, didn't ask what's wrong. Didn't rush to make things normal again. You stayed exactly where you were. And to her, that felt like coldness. But the truth. You were just protecting the very thing she didn't realize she was drawn to in the first place. Your center. You didn't move. Because real men don't shift under emotional pressure. You don't chase emotions that aren't grounded in clarity. You waited not for her to come back, but for her to realize, never left. You were right there, solid, still unchanged. And the more she tested, the more confused she became. Because instead of finding a boy desperate for her warmth, she found a man radiating his own. And that right there was the first crack in her test. Not because you failed, but because you didn't even take it. You just kept being who you were. It's easy to think she pulled away because of you, because of something you did, something you missed, a message you didn't send, compliment you didn't give. But that's the illusion. What she felt was internal, a ripple of doubt, a whisper of fear. A mirror suddenly turned on herself, and she didn't like what she saw. She began to feel exposed, too seen, too vulnerable, too invested. And when a woman feels that fragile, she doesn't always reach for comfort. She reaches for control. So she created space, not to hurt you, but to hide, to see if she could pull back without falling apart, to see if you'd rush in to rescue her, to prove your care, your presence, your desire. But here's the truth she didn't expect. You didn't react. You didn't try to earn back what you never lost. Because deep down, you knew her fear wasn't about your absence. It was about her own story. The story she's lived before, where men leave, where silence means rejection, where presence never lasts. So when you stayed still, when you didn't chase, she projected all of that onto you, assumed your calm meant you didn't care, assumed your patience was disinterest. But it was masculine. It was masculine, unshaken, unbothered, deeply aware. You understood that her distance was never a punishment. It was a plea disguised as pride. She needed to feel valuable again, not because you said it, but because she saw it reflected in your stillness, in your refusal to bend, because you weren't there. To soothe her fear, you were there to stand still while she faced it. And in that stillness, something rare happened. She began to realize the only one pulling away was her, and you. You were just being exactly who she secretly hoped you'd be all along. This is the part where most men fail. She pulls away and they collapse. They sense the change in her tone, her rhythm, her warmth. And instead of holding their ground, they panic. They rush in. They text too much, call too often, ask too many questions. They try to fix what wasn't broken. And in doing so, they shatter everything. Because the moment you chase her silence, the moment you try to earn back what you never truly lost, you lose the very thing she was unconsciously testing for. Your self-respect, your stillness. She never wanted to see you beg, wanted to see if you'd bend. And when you when you over-explain, when you try to decode her moods in real time, when you attempt to soothe her emotions by sacrificing your frame, you stop being the man. You become the mirror. And a woman who sees her chaos reflected in your behavior will never feel safe in your presence. But you didn't do that. You didn't overreach. You didn't overcompensate. You didn't play therapist or emotional translator. You remained still, clear, solid, not because you didn't feel anything, because you understood that not every storm is yours to calm. You knew your job isn't to fix her emotional waves. It's to stay unmoved by them, because the moment you break yourself to catch her, she loses what she was actually searching for. A man who can hold himself even when she can't. And that's the difference between being liked for a moment and being respected forever. She didn't want a speech. She didn't want flowers, or long paragraphs, or desperate explanations. She wanted something harder to find. Something even she didn't know how to name. She wanted to feel your gravity. That calm, masculine stillness that says, I'm not here to chase chaos. I'm here to remain whole. Because deep down, every feminine heart is drawn to one thing above all else. A man who doesn't flinch when she's unsure of herself. She needed to see that her pulling away wouldn't shatter your foundation, that you wouldn't beg, wouldn't whimper, wouldn't react like every other man who mistook her. Confusion for a call to action. She needed to feel your trust in yourself, your restraint, your quiet power. Because when you didn't respond to her silence with fear, when you didn't explain your emotions in hopes of buying back her closeness, she began to feel something rare, respect. Not the kind you ask for. The kind that grows in the shadow of your unshaken presence. She realized that you weren't holding, you were witnessing. You saw through the surface of her behavior, saw the insecurity beneath the test. And still, you didn't flinch. You didn't move to correct her, comfort her, or convince her. You just stood in your truth and let it echo. And in that space, something inside her softened. Because for the first time, she wasn't dealing with a man trying to win her. She was facing a man who had already won. Something far more valuable, himself, and that. That's what she secretly wanted all along at first. She didn't care, or at least that's what she told herself. You didn't reach out, and she convinced herself that it proved her point. See? He never really cared, but the silence lingered longer than she expected. No double texts, no sudden change in tone, no late night "are you okay?" Message from you, and what was once a quiet test became a deafening mirror. She began checking your stories, looking at your last scene, reading old messages just to feel something. Because the stillness she thought she wanted started to echo in places she didn't know existed. You didn't say anything, but your absence spoke. Not like punishment, not like a game, but like a man who knew his worth. Even when unseen, the world around her began to shift. Other men tried to fill the space with words, compliments, noise, but none of them had weight. None of them had presence. And now, you, the man she thought she could pull away from and forget, had become the one she couldn't stop feeling. Because your silence wasn't cold. It was powerful, and in that space, she finally saw it. You didn't disappear. You just didn't need to prove yourself. And that's what changed everything. It wasn't dramatic. There was no movie scene moment. No pouring rain. No whispered apology. Just silence. And in that silence, she broke. Not because of you, but because of herself. She sat alone one evening, scrolling through her phone, looking for anything that felt like you. A photo, a message, a trace of that steady energy that once grounded her, even when she didn't understand it. And that's when it hit her. You never gave her drama. You never gave her neediness. You never tried to convince her to stay. You gave her nothing back, because you had nothing to prove. And that's when she realized she had pushed away the very thing she claimed she wanted. A man who didn't chase. A man who didn't react. A man who remained. You weren't cold. You weren't cruel. Composed. True. To yourself, and in a world of men trying to be everything for everyone, you were the one man who chose to be everything for yourself first. That shook her, because now she understood. Your silence. It was presence. It was presence so deep, so grounded she didn't know how to receive it. She thought you gave nothing, but now she realizes you gave her everything she needed to grow and the space to either meet you there or lose you. And she lost you, not because you left, but because she couldn't rise to meet the man who never fell. And in the quiet of that truth, one thought echoed through her chest like a slow burn. You're not just attractive, you're unforgettable. Somewhere deep inside, you always knew you weren't like the others. Not louder, not needier, just different. You didn't beg for attention. You didn't rush to fix things. You didn't dance for approval in a world that rewards the loudest voice. You stayed still. You let her walk, not out of pride, but because a man rooted in his own truth doesn't chase what's drifting away to test his center. And that choice, that silence, that unshaken posture, it didn't just change her, it changed you. You realized your power isn't in what you say. It's in what you choose not to react to. That your value isn't measured by how many people want you, but by how rare it is to truly understand you. And those who do, they never forget. So keep walking like your soul is intact. Keep showing up with that quiet strength most people can't explain. And know this, the right ones won't need to be chased. The right ones won't punish your stillness. The right ones will recognize it and feel safer in it than anything they've ever known. Because you're not just a man in a crowd. You're the one they remember long after the noise is gone.